Alright, hi and welcome to another installment of Math Basics, Mr. Besh. Today we're going to use our prior knowledge and skill to compare and order ratios. Now, last lesson we talked about ratios and what they could look like. A ratio can be a fraction, they could be two numbers separated by the word 2, or they could be two numbers separated by a colon. To compare two ratios to determine which one is bigger than the other, I always tell my students to do two things first. Number one, write them both as fractions. So 1/4 was already a fraction, and then all I simply do for 6 to 10 is take the first number from left to right goes on top, the second number goes on the bottom. Second thing I tell my students is if any of your fractions can be reduced into lowest terms, make sure you do that. 6/10 definitely can be reduced down by dividing the top and bottom both by 2. Now, once you have both fractions, now we want to compare both fractions. Set them equal to, or set them beside each other, parallel here, 1/4 and 3/5. And what we're going to do to determine which one is bigger than the other is a cross-multiplying technique. What you do is you take the top of the first fraction, the numerator of the first fraction, which is 1, times the denominator of the second fraction, which is 5. 1 times 5 makes 5, and we write that above our first fraction. Now, we're going to do exactly the same step. We're going to take the top of the second fraction, the numerator here, which is 3, and we're going to multiply it by the denominator of the second fraction, which is 4, and write that number above the second fraction. Now, the two numbers that I wrote down, 5 and 12, the bigger of these two tell you which of the fractions is bigger. So because 12 is bigger than 5, it indicates that direction that 3/5 is bigger than 1/4. And yes, this will work any two times you are comparing two fractions together. You can always determine which one's bigger by using this cross-multiplying technique. Now, sometimes you have to compare or order from least to greatest more than just two ratios. Here's an example with 3. So right off the bat, first thing I do is take each and every one of these and write them as fractions in lowest terms. 1/4 is already a fraction. 2/6 reduces down to 1/3, and last but not least, 2:10 comes out to be 1/5. Now, once I have this, the next step that I have to do is take these 2 by 2, compare each of these ratios one by one with one another, setting them up just like I did the last time. And this is what it ends up looking like. I'm going to compare the 1/4 to 1/3. I'm going to compare the 1/4 to 1/5. And last but not least, I'm going to compare the 1/3 to 1/5. So now I'm going to do this technique not once like I did before, but I'm going to do it 3 times. The top of this fraction here, which is 1, times the bottom of this fraction, which is 3, comes out to be 3. Top of this one is 1 times the bottom of this one, which is 4. So that means that 4 is bigger than 3, so 1/3 is bigger than 1/4. Do it again to this next set of fractions. 1 times the bottom here is 5, so that's going to give me 5. 1 times the bottom of this one is going to give me 4, so that means that this one here is greater, 1/4 is greater than 1/5. Doing the same thing, 1 times 5 makes 5, 1 times 3 makes 3, and last but not least, 1/3 is greater than 1/5. Now, using this information, take your time and read it carefully. 1/3 is bigger than 1/4. 1/4 is bigger than 1/5, and 1/3 is bigger than 1/5 here. So that means 1/5 clearly is the smallest, so I am going to rank this from least to greatest as this being the least. So I'm going to call it 1. The one in the middle that I have now is 1/4, so that's going to be a 2. And last but not least, the greatest of all these values, notice that 1/3 is bigger than 1/5 and 1/4. This one gets a 3. And this is how we order ratios from least to greatest. Another technique that you could use, I know a lot of students really don't like working with fractions, they like to work with decimals. Well, if you like to work with decimals, then fine. Work with the decimals, just do your math right. In this ratio here, using the same exact example as before, my fraction was 1/4. To make this into a decimal, I need to take the top of the number 1 and put it inside the box. 4 goes outside the box, and I need to do some old-fashioned division. When I take 1 divided by 4, I get 0.25. Doing the same step for 1/3, 1 goes in the box, 3 goes outside the box. 1 divided by 3 will give us 0.3, and then they repeat forever. Last but not least, 1 divided by 5. 1 goes in the box, 5 goes outside the box, and when I do this, I get 0.2. Like I said, a lot of you look at this and say, oh, this is so much easier. Clearly, I see that 0.2 is the smallest. Notice it got the 1 ranking here. 0.25 was next in line, and that's why it gets the 2 ranking. And last but not least, 0.3 repeated with a bar gets the 3rd ranking. So if you want to make them into decimals, knock yourself out, because either way, you're doing some good math here, folks. Last but not least, what happens when I get fractions that are not proper fractions, improper fractions, meaning the top number is bigger than the bottom? Piece of cake. Take each and every single one of these and make them mixed fractions. Now, if you forgot how to make a mixed fractions, let me show you. To make an improper fraction a mixed fraction, you take the denominator, 3 here in this example, and you find out how many times it goes into the top, the numerator. 3 goes into 11, 3 times. Whatever's left over, the remainder goes on top of the fraction, and the bottom of the fraction stays the same. So 11 over 3 simplifies into a mixed fraction as 3 2/3. Doing the same thing here to 12 to 5. As a fraction, it would be 12 over 5. 5 goes into 12 2 times. Again, my remainder is 2, so that goes on top. And the bottom of the fraction's 5, so it stays a 5. 5:2 as a fraction is 5 over 2. 2 goes into 5 2 times. 1's the remainder, and 2 is the bottom of the fraction, so that's a 2. And last but not least, 13 over 4. 4 goes into 13 3 times. The remainder is 1. The bottom of the fraction is 4. And a lot of my students right now can take it from here. They can determine, based on this information, which of these fractions comes first. Second, third, and then fourth. However, if you can't, what you could do is you could take each and every one of these and make them decimals. Only look at the fraction part. 2/3, 2 divided by 3, and that will give you your decimal value. So 3 2/3 is 3.6 repeated. Do the same thing over here. This one's going to be 2 point, and whatever 2 divided by 5 comes out to be a decimal. 2 divided by 5 is 0.4. 2 1/2, a lot of you know this off by heart, that's going to be 2.5. And then last but not least, 3 1/4 is going to be 3.25. And once I get all this information and I look at it from my number line perspective, this is clearly the first one on my list, the least value, 2.4. 2.5 is not too far ahead. And then I get into my 3's. 3.25 is next on my list. And last but not least, 3.6 repeated is my greatest of the values. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is ordering ratios from least to greatest. I hope you found this both helpful and informative.